16. J.B. Watson, Science and Utopia. John Broadus Watson, 1878 to 1958, through his Psychology of Behaviorism, made a major impact on modern science, sociology, and industry, and had an influence in psychology so pervasive as to be described by Thorne Shipley thus: "It is hard to overestimate the influence which Watson has had on the subsequent development of psychology in America." Watson's influence outside of psychology was equally important in that he met a common temper in science and politics and made it vocal by means of his psychology. Today, his ideas are more than ever the axioms of contemporary thought, but they succeeded only because they made more explicit the implicit faith of Enlightenment culture. Watson studied under John Dewey at the University of Chicago, where he immediately became, after receiving his Ph.D., assistant in experimental psychology. He soon went to Johns Hopkins University in 1904, remaining until 1919. He lectured subsequently at the New School for Social Research, and then devoted his time to industry. His work very early made a major impact on intellectual and popular thought. The New York Times said of Watson's behaviorism that it marks an epoch in the intellectual history of mankind, and the New York Tribune wrote, "Perhaps this is the most important book ever written. One stands for an instant blinded with a great hope." What was this blinding great hope? The Enlightenment culture began and continues on the premise of the perfectibility of man by man. Essential to this fact of perfectibility is the passive nature of man, who is born without innate ideas or tendencies, or any original and sinful nature, and is hence, at worst, only neutral and therefore perfectly malleable. In the name of science and of empiricism, all influences in the life of man were ruled to be external, that is, sense impressions, environmental factors, and socially applied controls being the essence of man's development and personality. By means of this scientific concept, the horrors of Christianity, of Calvinism in particular with its doctrine of total depravity, man's inner apostasy against God, and hence inner determination, his responsibility to God, and his irreducibility to social control were to be met and overcome. Man could be educated. Man is like a blank sheet of white paper ready for science and society to use, and society is thus free to use him to build its true city of man as against the alien and hostile city of God. History can thus be wiped out by revolution, educational, social, political, economic, and, above all, scientific revolution, and man and society made anew. Education, in this sense, is empirical education and is hence total conditioning. Education in the true sense of the word, meaning leading out or developing the native abilities of the person, presupposes either innate ideas or an original nature which is resistant to and non-malleable by the scientific educator, and it is hence highly objectionable and invalid to the consistent Enlightenment man. Thus, predestination by God, coupled with the doctrine of human responsibility, must be ruled out in favour of predestination by society, that is, total social control by scientific man. Science was at first associated with the social speculations of the encyclopedists, and was discredited by the failures of the Revolution. The French Revolution, however, discredited only one version of the Enlightenment hope, which came to exuberant revival in 1859 with Darwin's Origin of Species, which, despite myths concerning opposition to it, sold out its first edition on the day of publication and immediately stimulated a revival of the Enlightenment's hope in science, religion, politics, education, and every other area of thought. It is in this tradition that Watson stands as a militant champion of the Enlightenment faith. Its, quote, self-evident, end quote, truths he confirms by declaring them to be fully scientific. In order to arrive at empirical man, man totally controllable and totally subject to empirical influences, Watson denied the validity and usefulness of the concepts of consciousness, which for him was hopelessly religious and led directly to the soul and hence to God. Behaviorism, on the contrary, holds that the subject matter of human psychology is the behavior or activities of the human being. Behaviorism claims that consciousness is neither a definable nor a usable concept, that it is merely another word for the soul of more ancient times. The old psychology is thus dominated by a kind of subtle religious philosophy. The fact that consciousness leads to religion, being inexplicable otherwise, is enough to rule it out of court. A question immediately arises, however, if consciousness can be thus casually outlawed, why not man? Why stop with consciousness? Watson was here consistent. For him, man is a whole animal. The behaviorist, in his effort to get a unitary scheme of animal response, recognizes no dividing line between man and brute. Accordingly, Watson was an unabashed and proud defender of the validity of an application to man of animal experimentation and the psychology of rats, dogs, etc. If other psychologists continued to look down on this kind of experiment, Watson declared, the behaviorists will be driven to using human beings as subjects and to employ methods of investigation which are exactly comparable to those now employed in the animal work. And to his fellow functionalists, Watson rightly observed, I feel that behaviorism is the only consistent and logical functionalism. The starting point of behaviorism, it needs to be borne in mind, is the oft-repeated rejection of consciousness. In one sweeping assumption after another, the behaviorists threw out the concepts both of mind and of consciousness, calling them carryovers from the church dogma of the Middle Ages. The behaviorists told the introspectionists that consciousness was just a masquerade for the soul. The behaviorist finds no mind in his laboratory, sees it nowhere in his subject. If the behaviorists are right in their contention that there is no observable mind-body problem and no observable separate entity called mind, then there can be no such thing as consciousness, or its substratum, the unconscious. The result is a concept of man as essentially passive and subject at all points to conditioning. Man will be what the behaviorist chooses to make of him, and he can be conditioned into the desired shapes in terms of this scientific concept of control. Watson spoke freely of the possibilities. In short, the cry of the behaviorist is, give me the baby and my world to bring it up in, and I'll make it crawl and walk. I'll make it climb and use its hands in constructing buildings of stone or wood. I'll make it a thief, a gunman, or a dope fiend. The possibility of shaping in any direction is almost endless. Even gross deficiencies in anatomical structure limit us far less than you may think. Take away man's hands and I will make him write. Use a typewriter, drive an automobile, paint and draw with his toes. Cut off his legs and paralyze his trunk muscles so that he will be bedridden, but give me only his hands and arms and I'll have him playing the violin, writing and doing 1,000 other things. Make him blind and he can still play ice hockey, shoot with some degree of skill, read and write, model and earn his living in 100 different ways. Rob him of his ear at birth and I can teach him to carry on a conversation with you by watching you speak. Make him a deaf mute and I will still build you a Helen Keller. Thus, prediction and control are the essence of behaviorism's creed. Given the stimulus, the response can be predicted. Given the response, the stimulus can be named. Personality is man-made. It is not a divine gift. My personality is but the totality or sum of my habit systems, my conditionings. Even adults, if total control were possible, could be reconditioned radically. Watson saw no wrong in the ideal of controlling the individual to have him behave as society specifies. For him, the problem was to get the knowledge necessary to do the job properly. For Watson, social control of man's behaviour means control of his actions, for thoughts are not the primary source of influence in his empirical theory, but actions which are external. Behaviour is thus the central problem. Thoughts can be safely left to take care of itself when safe methods of regulating behaviour can be obtained. What a man thinks is only a reflection of what he does. The goal of the psychologist is, 1. To predict human behaviour by its knowledge of stimulus and response, and 2. To control human behaviour. If it is demanded by society that a given line of conduct is desirable, Watson's theories of talking and thinking were closely related and a stimulus to much modern quackery and semantics, in that his empiricism required him to hold that faulty conditioning by misused words is basically identical with faulty behaviour. Behaviorism was thus credited with the ability to correct thinking as well as behaviour by proper conditioning. Behaviorism would also replace religion with experimental ethics, which means ethics as determined by science and society. Given free rein, behaviorism will gradually change the universe. Moreover, men and women should desire this conditioning. It ought to make men and women eager to rearrange their own lives and especially eager to prepare themselves to bring up their own children in a healthy way. I wish I had time more fully to describe this, to picture to you the kind of rich and wonderful individual that we would make of every healthy child if only we could let it shape itself properly and then provide for it a universe in which it could exercise that organization, a universe unshackled by legendary folklore of happenings thousands of years ago, unhampered by disgraceful political history, free of foolish customs and conventions which have no significance in themselves, yet which hem the individual in like taut steel bands. I'm not asking here for a revolution. I'm not asking people to go out to some god-forsaken place, form a colony, go naked and live a communal life, nor am I asking for a change to a diet of roots and herbs. I'm not asking for free love. I am trying to dangle a stimulus in front of you, a verbal stimulus which, if acted upon, will gradually change this universe. For the universe will change if you bring up your children, not in the freedom of the libertine, but in behavioristic freedom, a freedom which we cannot even picture in words, so little do we know of it. Will not these children in turn, with their better ways of living and thinking, replace us as society, and in turn bring up their children in a still more scientific way, until the world finally becomes a place fit for human habitation? It could be observed that the fitness of the world for human habitation is not the question, but the moral fitness of man. The experimental ethics of Watson is, in terms of his pragmatism and functionalism, radically relativistic. It is the ethics of meeting the requirements of the social will. This society and its social will are to be geared to the fulfillment of man in terms of Satan's temptation of Jesus in the wilderness. Give the people bread and miracles, provide them with social conditions which will make it unnecessary for men to be good. Let the good society replace the good man, and social ethics supplant personal ethics. In this society, man can be free only to be what society wishes him to be. I'm not arguing for free anything, least of all free speech. I've always been very much amused by the advocates of free speech. In this harum-scarum world of ours, brought up as we are, The only person who ought to be allowed free speech is the parrot, because the parrot's words are not tied up with his bodily acts and do not stand as substitutes for bodily acts. All true speech stands substitutable for bodily acts. Hence, organised society has just as little right to allow free speech as it has to allow free action, which nobody advocates. When the agitator raises the roof because he hasn't free speech, he does it because he knows that he will be restrained if he attempts free action. He wants, by his free speech, to get someone else to do free acting, to do something he himself is afraid to do. The behaviourist, on the other hand, would like to develop his world of people from birth on, so that their speech and their bodily behaviour could equally well be exhibited freely everywhere without running afoul of group standards. Two things are here clearly apparent. One, when mind and body are made one, mind being resolved into body, thoughts and action are also made indistinguishable and any priority of thought destroyed. 2. And only freedom is to be conditioned to act in conformity to group standards. Watson's goals, now less naively stated, are the goals of science today. Science now aims at 1. The creation of life itself through biochemistry. 2. The creation of minds through machinery. 3. The reconditioning of minds by medication and drugs capable of controlling and remaking man. And 4. Total social engineering and control through the state. It has even been proposed that man be wired at birth for permanent control through electrical impulses. Watson's particular dream is now far exceeded by contemporary scientists, one of whom has candidly stated, "Theologians will protest, but it is certainty itself that man will play God." And educators, having become scientific and themselves products of the Enlightenment, will also continue to play God. But every Enlightenment attempt to create Utopia has only brought man a step closer to the borderlands of a totalitarian hell. Its expectant followers are indeed being blinded, but not by a great hope,